For 5 months, we've been investigating what appears to be rampant fraud in a massive state program. A fraud suspected of costing Minnesota taxpayers as much as $100 million a year. Our reporting is based on public records and nearly a dozen government sources who have direct knowledge of what's happening. These sources have a deep fear, and there's evidence to support their concerns that some of that public money is ending up in the hands of terrorists. We begin at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, where mysterious suitcases filled with cash have become a fairly common carry-on. It's the morning of March 15th. We're chasing a tip about a man who's leaving the country. Our sources tell us he just took a carry-on bag through security that was packed with $1 million cash. You can do that as long as you fill out one of these government forms. We're told these cloak and dagger-like scenarios now happen almost weekly at MSP International. The money is usually headed to the Middle East, Dubai, and points beyond. Our sources say last year alone, more than $100 million cash left MSP in carry-on luggage.
What we were interested in is where it was going.
The national go-to expert on what's behind these mysterious money transfers is Glenn Kearns. He's a former Seattle police detective who spent 15 years on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force until his retirement.
It's an outright crime. It's unbelievable.
Kearns tracked millions of dollars in cash that was leaving on flights from Seattle. It was coming from hawalas, businesses used to courier money to countries that have no official banking system. Some immigrant communities rely on hawalas to send funds to help impoverished relatives back home. Kearns discovered some of the money was being funneled to a hawala in a region of Somalia that's controlled by the Al-Shabaab terrorist group.
So I talked to a couple sources who had lived in that region, and I said, if money is going to this hawala, do you think it's going to Al-Shabaab? And he said, oh, definitely. That area is controlled by Al-Shabaab, and they control the hawala there.
He says when the money arrives, whether it was intended for legitimate purposes or not, Al-Shabaab or other groups demand a cut. As Kearns dug deeper, he found that some of the individuals who were sending out tens of thousands of dollars worth of remittance payments happened to be on government assistance in this country. How could they possibly come up with such big bucks to transfer back home?
We had sources that told us it's all about it's welfare fraud. It's all about the daycare.
To better understand the connection between daycare fraud and the surge in carry-on cash, you have to look at the history of this crime. 5 years ago, the Fox 9 investigators were first to report that daycare fraud was on the rise here in Minnesota. We exposed how some businesses were gaming the system to steal millions in government subsidies meant to help low-income families with their child care expenses.
This is a great way to make some money. I think it's kind of that informal word of mouth.
In order for the scheme to work, the daycare centers need to sign up low-income families that qualify for child care assistance funding. These surveillance videos are from a case prosecuted by Hennepin County. They show parents checking their kids into a center only to leave with them a few minutes later. Sometimes no children would show up. But either way, the center would bill the state for a full day of child care. This video from that same case shows a man handing out envelopes of what are believed to be kickback payments to parents who are in on the fraud. Where was the money going?
I don't know exactly where it went, but it adds up when you begin to look at how many people are involved.
One recent federal case points to at least some of the money going overseas. This is video of Fozia Ali being sworn in as a member of the City of Hopkins Park Board. As she was taking her oath of office, she was also under investigation for wire fraud and theft of public money. State and federal agents had already raided Ali's daycare center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government for over $1 million worth of bogus child care services.
We found records that indicated that she was collecting a significant amount of money for a much larger number of children than were actually attending the center.
Did any of the money go overseas?
We are aware that some of the funds went overseas, which she was cashing out money from the business.
Do you have any idea what it was going for?
I can't say.
Can't say or don't know?
I can't say.
Investigators analyzed Ali's cell phone to track her activities. She'd taken a 2-month trip from Minnesota to Dubai and then Kenya, staying at times in $800 a night hotel rooms. She used an app on her phone to bill the state of Minnesota for child care services while she was out of the country. Ali pled guilty to the daycare fraud and this March started serving time in a federal prison. She declined our request for an interview.
We believe that there's a scope of fraud out there that we need to really get our arms around and ensure that those dollars are going to the kids that really need them.
The acting commissioner for the Department of Human Services told us his agency has 10 daycares currently under active investigation for fraud. We've learned dozens more are considered suspicious. Search warrants obtained by the Fox 9 investigators show each one of the suspect centers has received several $1 million in child care assistance funds. According to public records and government sources, most are owned by Somali immigrants.
Do you have any evidence to suggest this looks like organized crime?
There's a common pattern in how a lot of these are carried out, but beyond that, not something that I would directly categorize as organized crime.
Sources in the Somali community tell us it's an open secret that starting a daycare center is a license to make money. The fraud is so widespread, they say, that people buy shares of daycare businesses to get a cut of the huge public subsidies that are pouring in. Some government insiders believe this scam is costing the state at least $100 million a year, half of all child care subsidies.
Is that within the realm of possibility?
I don't think half sounds credible. I certainly think that some of the schemes that we're seeing, and certainly the ones that we've brought forward already for prosecution, involve millions of dollars. I mean, this is not a small scale that we're looking at.
Minnesota started aggressively going after daycare fraud in 2014. Back then, it was easier to track the flow of money. The state would pay a daycare's bill, and within hours of the money showing up in the business's bank account, funds were being wired to the United Arab Emirates. But those wire transfers stopped after a few centers were busted, which takes us back to the suitcases of cash at Minneapolis-St. Paul International. In 2015, investigators documented $14 million in carry-on cash. By 2016, it had mushroomed to $84 million, and then last year, $100 million. A trend all too familiar to former terrorism investigator Glenn Kearns.
How much confidence can you say that it's likely some of this money is going towards terrorism?
I'd say absolutely, absolutely. Our sources tell us that. Good sources from the community, leaders. My personal feeling is we need a nationwide task force to clamp down on this kind of fraud.
This crime is spreading. Our sources tell us fraudsters in other states are now using the Minnesota playbook to rip off millions of public dollars meant to help kids. I'm Fox 9 investigator Jeff Ballion.